Oh, this is one out of a jam jar you got here.
Warning. The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. If you're new to this podcast, you can find all of our shows, past, present, and in the future, wherever you listen to podcasts. However, our preferred feed or podcast provider / aggregator is iTunes for their ratings and review system. We're also somewhat partial to Spotify. But as I said, please find us wherever. If it comes down to whether you're going to listen to us or not listen to us, just go with whatever is comfortable. Right, David?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As long as they interact with us, Mike. I want people to interact with us more.
Yeah, and as you can tell, the demon bisexual is here in the House of Mystery, and that's why he is very adamant about people
touching us.
Being involved with us because he's anxious to clean up the mess. That's pretty much the meaning of his life.
Gives me joy in life.
Yeah. All right. So we are here again to discuss and jump right back into Cy Spurrier's second installment of Hellblazer issue. When I say second installment, of course, I'm considering this as the second installment of his ongoing storyline. Let's just say ongoing, because I'm sure this isn't going to be the last time he writes Hellblazer, especially since this particular run is getting a lot more attention than the first. Thankfully, it is. Now, that is a good thing. We want people to discover John Constantine because, as we have discussed numerous times now, the first run, it just went under the radar. The first Cy Spurrier run. It did not connect with mainstream audiences. And not because of quality issues, but because of marketing. People just didn't know it was there.
Yeah, because it's embarrassing when you have other writers on their own social media having to say, "Hey guys, we have another another Constantine series going on over here."
Hey guys, over here.
Over here.
That's pretty much what happened. So in this episode, we are going to be covering John Constantine, Hellblazer number 5, Dead in America. This is being called an anthology, which features Dead in America's core creative team. Cy Spurrier temporarily relinquishes or shares some of his writing duties to highlight other writers who actually take Constantine and his team in their double-decker bus into stories that are quite interesting and feel very much like Constantine. And in fact, in many ways, this is the issue, David, that I've been waiting for. And I know people were online saying, this is a great story, but it amounts to just filler. That's all it really is. The most negative thoughts I've read so far about Dead in America comes from this issue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, what? This is the most coherent, consolidating narrative we've had. It brings everything he's been working on.
Yeah.
Brings it together, grounds it. He takes the abstract that he has been working on and grounds it, contextualizes it into 3 distinct stories.
Yeah.
That furthers the themes he's been working on.
That's the big thing. It connects to the theme that he is trying to convey in this story arc right now of Hellblazer.
Yeah.
I like the fact that basically also for some people out there that are still feeling confused, they have to go, I hate to say this, but they have to go back and read the first run of Hellblazer 2 to actually understand more meaning.
A little bit.
It would probably help.
Of course, yes. A little bit of context would help. However, I do feel like people can probably pick this up and understand the story that is being given. Now, understand is a very
strong statement.
Yeah, because there are some abstract things that typical comic book readers may find exasperating, which I have found a thread on Twitter now that's kind of saying as much. that they're not really understanding what's happening, but they still love it. And we'll get into that towards the end of our discussion. I personally really enjoyed this issue, seeing these other writers under Spurrier's leadership take control of the narrative, you know, taking the team that Constantine has formed in this double-decker bus across the main street of America, Route 66, which for Spurrier's story is a perfect component because it represents, Route 66, represents a cultural symbol of freedom, travel, and the open road.
And the open road, yeah.
All of which are central to the American identity, which is what Spurrier is currently dissecting in Dead in America. And it falls in sync with the narrative dimensions Spurrier has outlined so far in his initial, let's say, prior 5 issues or 4 issues. Also, there's commentary on the nuances of history and how facts of the past are not necessarily history until it's been selected by the historian or scholar, highlighting the clear distinction between facts of the past and history. Oftentimes, people think they're one and the same. They're not. The fact that I took a piss 5 minutes ago, that is an act of the past. But is it history?
Is it history?
It's not.
Yes.
So we start getting into the gray area of what makes history distinct from nuances of the past.
And that's the thing that I really liked about this issue. I actually think number 5 is truly the strongest issue of Spurrier up to this point.
Yeah.
Because now all those things that in the past shows where we've reviewed, one of the things that I basically was a little frustrated with was the fact that Spurrier would tiptoe around what his themes are. What are you trying to do? Why are you trying to be so vague? Just make your themes concrete and use them in a format. This is what issue 5 was. This is what I've been waiting for, to actually see, okay, in one issue, Mike, he's able to actually express his theme of the story arc up to this point and do it in a way that basically is engaging and relevant to the main character of John Constantine.
Yeah. I was a little nervous going to this issue because I knew that people were talking about it as an anthology. And I'm like, really? An anthology in the midst of a limited run? That seems a little weird. And I was already ready to get upset. I'm like, what are they doing? But first off, that's a major misnomer. This is not an anthology. I don't know why people keep calling it that. All the outlets are calling it an anthology. It is not an anthology.
It's not.
This is one singular narrative written episodically. Yes. I think people get confused with episode and anthology. They're two different things, and you can have numerous stories being told that seem like they're distinct and separate from each other, but they're organized under one central theme. And I would even say that's not even necessarily the case with this story. These individual stories all take place while they're traveling Route 66.
Yes.
They're all connected by that one theme. And typically, yes, anthologies are kept together under a theme.
Mm-hmm.
But in all actuality, issue 5 is a singular story that functions as an episodic narrative where the stories are more directly interconnected with recurring characters and an overarching plot. So this is an anthology. Anthologies usually have separate characters. Usually they're united under a theme. But this was just a story that happened to have 3 separate segments, 5 technically, if you include the prologue and the epilogue.
Yeah.
Which were written by Spurrier, which was the best way you could have written a comic book like this. If you're going to open up the doors for other writers to write in a specific issue, the fact that he is starting it and ending it allows for him to bring all of the stories together under one narrative, theme, and thread. And it pushes the main story forward. Because if we didn't have the epilogue and the prologue, the stories themselves would have felt like we were meandering, that we were just pushing or wading through filler stories.
Yeah.
And in fact, what it was a story that harkens back in a lot of ways to the older Hellblazer stories that tell very succinct stories that have to do with the greater theme of that particular run. So this felt like almost like a mini Hellblazer run in a singular issue.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, right?
And that's the thing that I really did enjoy, was the way that Spurrier was able to do all those things that you mentioned and kind of play around with the mechanics of how to tell a story.
Yeah.
And my past criticisms of like issue 3, right, where he was trying to play around with the format and the mechanics of poetry, right? Mm-hmm. And we lambasted him because at the end of the day, that story meandered and it didn't really
work.
It didn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't get to a point. There wasn't a point to it. He didn't express anything meaningful. Here is like, well, I think he got it better.
Yeah.
Where he was able to express something.
Listen, I would say that he did express something meaningful. There is meaning there.
Yeah.
And there's intent. I just think the meaning got lost.
The meaning got lost because it got convoluted.
Yeah, it was too abstract. But this is taking all of those aspects. Sometimes people think, because I'm a stickler on writing, that people think that I'm too stuck on conventions. And conventions lead to stale writing. I disagree. However, you can experiment as well. As long as you understand and you are a master of your craft, you can experiment. And this is an example, issue 5, of a master of his craft experimenting with writing and doing it the right way. Because all in all, it really did work in almost every single way. According to various outlets, the series so far has relied on a slow burn exploration of American mythology, building toward what can only be an eventual confrontation with the 3 entities transforming, editing, that's a key word, and omitting, another key word, the cultural landscape. And those 3 entities, of course, is liberty, luxury, and law. And the issue is composed, as we have been stating, of 3 episodes with various artists who effectively capture, I guess you can say they effectively capture the textile richness, there we go, of Spurrier's depiction of America as a declining society, or what some call late state society, or a crisis state, referring to a society facing existential challenges.
Yes.
So in that regard, he absolutely does achieve that goal. David, you already kind of flirted around with your thoughts, but what are your initial thoughts in a nutshell with this issue, as well as where we are currently in the broader storyline?
My initial thought about this issue was just like what you said. I was very reluctant at first with this issue, especially hearing it's an anthology. He's going to let different stories in this one issue now. So automatically I was like really hesitant, because I'm like going, okay, why would you do that in the middle of a story that you still haven't really made your point and haven't settled yet into your main quote story narrative? What are your themes and stuff?
Yeah, we didn't really cross over into tangible story territory yet. We were still not quite sure what the actual story is per se.
Yeah, because he was playing around of like motivations of still his villains.
Yeah, but this issue in itself, David, is the issue and why it's so important.
Yes.
It clearly tells the reader what this story, what Dead in America is about.
And like, instead, as I was reading this, I'm like, okay, let's take a look at this with an open mind. And instead, what I found was actually the whole idea of the anthology, the way he wanted to write it, was simply a way of how he wanted to format the story. He was going to stick to his narrative, but he was actually going to use the format of an anthology to kind of get his point across. And
that's a good way of putting it.
That's why I was like, at the end of this, I'm going, oh my God, he answered all my problems that I've had thus far up to the series with this one single issue.
Yeah.
Because now I know, okay, this is what the game plan is. This is what your themes are going to be playing around. This is why you have those illusions that you were playing around with from issue 1 through 4 about what exactly are these powers that John is dealing with.
Well, we had as you had just made the point, with issues 1, 2, 3, 4, you're basically setting up the bases. Your bases are loaded. Let's use a baseball metaphor here.
Yeah.
The bases are loaded. With issue 5, he knocked it out the park and brought everyone home. Because now at the end of the story, you clearly understand what the story is. Now, obviously, there were vague conceptions, things that we had theorized, but more succinctly now we can put our thoughts more succinctly into what's the word I'm looking for, David? We can more succinctly form our thoughts on the actual meaning and direction the story is taking. Because for all intents and purposes, this is a commentary on how history is recorded.
Yeah.
That's what the story is about.
It's how history is recorded and how myths are made.
Correct.
And like, not all myths are made equally. You know, there's certain people that do believe in this myth, and there's people that don't believe in this myth.
Yeah.
And might be confused by this myth and not understand what's going on. That's what I liked about the stage he set in the first story he told with the old man walking down the road.
Yeah.
Because Nat is that person that she is not. She's the outsider of the myth. However, even though she's the outsider, the myth continues on because the old man continues it on because it's his belief.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, of course, to Nat, it's confusing, and she's like going, no, this doesn't make any sense. And Constantine's like telling her, just relax, let it go, because you're not part of that myth. You're the outsider. He's the one that's living it.
Yeah. Plus, there's dangers for involving yourself and other people's stories and myth. It's stuff that they've alluded to, which we'll get into, hopefully, if we have time towards the end.
Yeah.
But all in all, Dave, the initial story or prologue written by Spurrier, it keeps the momentum of the main myth arc going. The three villains observing Constantine from afar, they muse about their plans and seem to be starting to grow concerned or agitated with Constantine's interference and Dream's involvement. This part was probably one of my favorite moments because it speaks on the selective process of history.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when the three entities talk about the unsuitable nature of certain stories, specific stories of history that are considered ugly, like the many atrocities suffered by the American indigenous, and they wish to remove it from their corpus, from their body of work. It was an allegory that I found incredibly interesting when the three villains say some stories are unfit for our nation.
Our nation, yeah.
Old and new is a statement on how history is crafted. It's a selection process, and it goes right back to the comment I made about me going pee. What's the difference between a past action and history? Well, history is selected and then pawned off as history.
As history.
And people are very selective. That's why we don't read, really, in high school about the atrocities that this country has committed. And in large part, I understand. You really want to teach 5-year-olds, hey, guys, America killed Indians. I mean, I get it. I get that we have to be careful with what we teach the youth, but at the same time, we just fucking admit shit.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's ugly. That makes us look bad.
No, Johnny. That we didn't shoot that Indian. We put happy bullets in him.
Right. And understandably, looking at this objectively, it's what all cultures do. We don't privilege the ugly stories.
Yeah.
There's places like Germany that have no choice because their atrocities happened so recent and at such a massive scale, in a way that nearly toppled the globe.
Yeah. And in that regard, they had to face
they can't omit
reality.
They can't. I mean, there are some that try, and say things didn't happen. But my point is that history is. I don't want to say that cliche line that history is written by the winners. It's not necessarily, but it's written by the dominant culture.
Yeah. You cannot argue the truth behind that statement.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Is like, while it's a quote unquote cliche saying, it's a hard truth that everyone has to understand.
Well, David, if I kill you, and in doing so, I create a new America that's great for everyone, am I going to report the story or the part of the history that I had to kill you in order to create this greatness?
Exactly. No, you're going to actually focus on, hey, look how great the world is.
Right. It's a natural human tendency to be selective in the stories we tell. And unfortunately, it does hinder and marginalize particular groups. And that's really what this story was attempting to convey. How certain stories stay, certain stories evaporate and are forgotten. And this serves as an adequate platform. Ultimately, this entire story serves as an adequate platform for, or I should say, let me backtrack, Jesus. So because this is an allegory for the selective process of history making, this serves as an adequate platform for our series of interconnected stories that take place along Route 66, which is called by our villains ghost veins, clogged with bile, and Constantine refers to it as the corrupted ley line of American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Ultimately, these were stories that delved into various aspects of American culture that have been traditionally ignored because it does not gel with the ideological imperatives of dominant culture.
Yes. It's the stuff that basically people don't want to talk about.
And I think Route 66, which I love the history of Route 66. I know. Yeah. I like the pretty history of Route 66. But there are things pertaining to Route 66 that makes it very much an appropriate locale for this or these stories.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, the whole idea of Route 66 is like, it's tied to Americana. It's tied to the essence, the soul of the American spirit. And
right.
to use that, that's actually a really cool way of using it, the allegory of trying to talk about American myth.
And also the connection to the American dream and the disillusionment of the American dream. Because while Route 66 is celebrated as a symbol of freedom and adventure, it also represents the darker aspects of the American dream. Yes. The highways, the romanticized aspects of the highway have been, or has, I should say, obscured the realities of economic disparity, urban decay, as well as the challenges faced by marginalized communities along the route. So there's a lot of history. When they say it's the bile or the ley line of corruption, I mean, that's a bit much. However, there's an argument to be made that those are adequate ways to describe it.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you think about it, just as a normal human being, when we're driving down, say, any interstate or any freeway right now, you're not paying attention to everything else that's outside those windows. You're paying attention to straight ahead.
Yeah.
Always looking out the front window. And essentially the idea of the stories that you miss, that's what I liked about this the way he used the characters here is like Constantine is being used as kind of like he's the guide. He's the one that basically is saying, no, keep on driving forward. Keep on driving forward. And like I like the moments when Nat and Noah try to question him and John answers in his usual manner and basically says, just ignore it. Because that's what normal human beings will do on this type of freeway is all the other things are going to be going on all at once. We have one set goal. And it's a very... Someone actually told me online that basically it's a very capitalistic way of looking at it. And I'm going, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I thought this is more clever than just saying, oh, America is dying or America is down with America. This is a clever way of telling a story of, like what you alluded to earlier, a nation in decay.
Yeah. Despite the fact that many of these stories, well, not many, 3. The fact that these stories, I would say, definitely help ground the greater myth arc. You know, it helps rid some of the abstractness of the some of the narrative components from the prior 4 issues. There are still some interpretation discrepancies. For example, the final story dealing with the cryptozoologist.
Yes.
I've seen online this particular story has been interpreted in various
So
ways.
many ways, yeah.
And who am I to say which one is right or wrong? But I feel like none of them have hit it on the head quite right. I feel like the Chupacabra myth, it's a little inaccurate. Number one, it's being treated as an old myth, but it's actually a very recent myth.
Yeah.
That was derived from sightings, and they have actually put this myth to rest because it's been discovered that a lot of these Chupacabra sightings are just dogs with mange.
It's animals that are
Coyotes.
Coyotes.
Yeah, so this is a weird myth to use, but it still works for the purposes of what they're trying to do with stories of history. For example, they talk about the discrepancies of the Chupacabra myth and how it doesn't quite work with the other myths so far.
Of Chupacabra, yeah.
Right. However, Nat even, I believe, states that even though it does not fit with these other myths, it is very much embedded within the stars and stripes of
Yes.
America. And when Constantine says, what does he say exactly about the Latin American wave? Basically, what that entire story was about was trying to say that even though history and the people within dominant culture has continually tried to write history or select history in ways that exclude Latinos, Hispanics, that this is that they're illegal immigrants, that they don't belong here. I'm being very hyperbolic here with my wordplay, but my point is that in all actuality, what this story, let me backtrack. Jesus Christ. Hold on. In many ways, the reason why they can't rid themselves of this Chupacabra myth is because they're trying to insinuate that no matter how hard you try to rewrite or select history for your dominant culture, you cannot rid or get rid of the fact that Hispanics have been here since day one.
Yeah.
I think that's the point.
Yeah. Because like it goes to like what the retort of
most of southern United States was all Mexico.
Yeah. Well, because it's like when he makes that comment about immigration and the Latin American wave, I like the fact that the Chupacabra or the cryptologist turns around and says, "Hey man, whatever you say," because to him, to the myth, it doesn't matter. It's basically just like what you said. It's the people who write history just taking whatever we see and tailoring it to what we want to believe.
Well, they have, yes. The argument is that dominant culture has crafted, created, selected histories that prop the dominant culture up.
Yes.
And no matter how many times you try to rewrite and select and reaffirm this dominant culture, you can't rid facts.
And that's what the Chupacabra represents in the end, is the facts.
Yes.
And
even if it's a discrepancy, it still belongs. Even if it goes against your story, it doesn't quite work within your story.
yeah.
It still belongs. There's nothing you can do
there's nothing
to
you
get
can do.
rid of something that is inherent.
That's why I love the final point in that story where Constantine makes the comment, "Don't try to control the story, ladies and gents, and don't be a fucking goat."
Yeah.
And like that's why I like really enjoyed about it was like you see these layers in his storytelling where it's like it can be convoluted at times with Spurrier when he layers things upon layer, but here he did it just perfect.
Yeah.
Where if you know what you're looking at, you can interpret the story one way, but at the end of the day, you can interpret it so many other ways.
Well, that's the beautiful thing, David, about this issue, because you're literally speaking on things that I have written down on my notes, dealing with authorship and the role of history. It all works. There is something to be said. A part of me, As long as this story or this run ends on a high note for me, I might go back, reread everything, and actually write an essay on it, because there's a lot to be said. Just looking at the aspects of history or the role of history, the distinction between, for instance, fact or facts of the past and history, as we have been talking about, it resonates with Bart's ideas on narrative and how stories are constructed, which he is a post-structuralist, if people aren't familiar with Roland Barthes. The notion that history is selective and shaped by those who tell it speaks to the power dynamics inherent in storytelling. And in the Hellblazer narrative, the villain's desire to omit unsuitable stories from the national narrative reflects this idea. It suggests that the dominant culture's ideology influences which histories are preserved and which are erased. And this manipulation of narrative power can also be seen as a critique of the larger socio-political landscape, where certain truths about American identity, particularly those involving marginalized communities, as I had said, are often suppressed. And now if you throw in the aspect of post-structuralism and how history is told, and how someone like, I believe it was Barthes, who talked about the death of the author, and how all we're doing to construct stories nowadays is essentially we're taking scriptures, snippets, piecing them together to tell our own select stories. And that's why the title of his famous essay is The Death of the Author. So in a lot of ways, it feels like Spurrier, and the only reason why I'm even saying this is because he's already pulled from literature to begin with. It seems to be that seems to be his source of inspiration for this run. You had T.S. Eliot's poem, and now you have aspects of post-structuralism and how stories are told, retold, recontextualized, and then propped up as fact, fiction, story, or as unique. So now we're moving into post-structuralist aspects. There is a lot going on here, and this isn't by accident.
No,
this
it can't be by accident.
This is Spurrier fucking around in a good way.
Yeah, and exactly. This is him fucking around in a good way. And he's knowing how to skirt that line. Because, like, the thing I really do like, too, is, like, while you can interpret this, you could interpret the story so many different ways, never once did I ever see any arguments that you had interpretations that basically went against each other. It was just other interpretations.
Yeah.
And like, that's solely because you can actually see that Spurrier is still sticking to his fundamentals when it comes to storytelling. He's not going to deviate from his themes. And in doing so, doing stuff like this, doing stuff literature-wise, and basically doing stories in these unique formats, the best way to actually tell stories like that is if you stick to your fundamentals and stick to basically ABCs of storytelling. Stick to your themes, never deviate from your own methodology.
ABCs, always be contextualizing.
Always be contextualizing.
Yeah, I really like how this worked out, especially, David, when you look at this whole post-structuralist aspect and the selection of history. I mean, the fact that this storyline is written by 4 different people, that also aids and substantiates our interpretation.
Well, I think it helps, too, because, like, the 4 people are on a unified front. You don't necessarily have one writer coming in, I'm going to do my own thing.
Well, yes, there's organization.
There's organization. Yeah, there's order to it.
Well, in a lot of ways, this was written a lot like a TV show where you have the showrunner who sets the path.
Yeah.
Either this is what we're going to do, this is what the story's about, have fun, write me a story, but make sure you stay within these parameters and you push this aspect more succinctly so that we can move into issue 6, with on the ground running. So we can
on the ground running.
Yeah. So, I mean, dude, this is just a well-organized comic book. It takes many of the problems that I have had with this run so far and puts them to rest.
Yeah.
I feel that this probably should have come around issue 3.
Oh, easily. I think, if there is one negative, and it's not on this issue because I really do like this issue. If there's one negative I would take away from Hellblazer up to this point is I think that doing an issue like this, to me, makes issue 3 and 4 irrelevant. So I didn't need 3 and 4.
It really does, Dave.
You could have easily
maybe not 4, but there is an argument to be made for 4. But
Yeah,
definitely 3.
but definitely 3. But if you think about it,
But also, David, looking at this intellectually in through a more sophisticated lens, I would say, in order to say that more definitively, we'd have to wait to the end. Because what if part of his story is homages to literature? Again, going to post-structuralism, okay? And this idea that authorship is essentially, and I'm streamlining this. This is a very rich theory. I'm streamlining it down to for simplistic reasons.
yeah,
But the idea of taking something and piecing it together. Think of a story as a puzzle. That's the idea of post-structuralism.
yeah,
And all an author does nowadays is take pieces of another puzzle, pieces from a puzzle over here, pieces from a puzzle over there, and then puts together these pieces and forces them together in order to make his own story. So if you look at issue 3 as an homage to literature, T.S. Eliot's poetry, then this all works and it's in sync. And that's why I'm saying now I'm looking at everything differently. I still stand by my thoughts on issue 3. It is a mess in a lot of ways, but I would look at it more favorably if when we get to the end, I see that this is in fact what he's doing. He's using a lot of post-structuralist theories to craft his story.
I will agree with you at that point, because then at that point we can actually see what truly his game plan was from beginning to end.
Yeah.
The only caveat to that I'm going to say is my main concern, especially when it comes to reading comics, if I can take an issue and remove it and omit it and basically say, I don't really need that issue to get your point across, that's when I basically say, okay, you kind of you fumbled at this point.
Well, now, David, you sound like the people who write history. Like, well, listen, if it doesn't matter, then I'm just going to admit it.
Exactly.
Look
Ta-da!
at you.
That's how it all works.
So just so that we don't give all the credit to Spurrier, even though, listen, it does fall under his leadership, why this issue is so great, we should bring to light the actual writers of every individual story. So Aaron Campbell took a hand in writing the One-Way Ticket, correct?
Yes. I think. Let me see. Yeah, One-Way Ticket was written by Aaron Campbell.
Okay. Well, you know what? We're probably wrong on this. We know for sure that Aaron Campbell and Spurrier wrote. I wish I had this information in front of me. I find it a little frustrating that even the main DC wiki does not even say who wrote these stories.
Welcome to comic books.
How do you not give proper credit to your writers on your own website?
Welcome to Writers in Comics.
Wow. I think I would be very upset if I was a writer for DC right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I've heard a lot of my friends who are writers in the industry basically say they've written things that they don't get proper credit for.
That's unbelievable.
And it's sad.
Yeah.
But that is the bullpen life. That's what happens when you're a writer in a bullpen in comic book industry.
I'm going to look it up because I feel like that's a gross error on our part. Yeah, it doesn't say. You know what? I apologize to our listeners out there that we don't. Actually, you know what? I apologize to the writers.
Yeah.
That I don't have this information. I will put it within the detail section of our episode release for the podcast. Yeah. All right. You know what, David? This does bring us to the end of our discussion. But we do have some final thoughts to share. Overall, a brilliant issue composed entirely of social commentary told through allegory while also pushing the bigger story forward. So for me, this is what has been missing. Classic Hellblazer narratives overlaid with an organic social relevance, intelligence. It's non-contrived in its efforts toward dissecting the socio-political power structures, identities, and myths. It's a 93% for me.
I have agree. I'm totally in agreement with you. This is my favorite issue up to this point in the Hellblazer run. This is kind of like what I was hoping of getting. This kind of is reminiscent to his first run.
Yeah.
And my score is at a 95. Oh. The thing I really enjoyed about this was like no characters were wasted. Like none of the characters I felt were just sitting around meandering. Everyone played their role perfectly. And this is the first issue I feel this is how we truly, that Spurrier shows who John Constantine is.
Yeah, you're right. This is a good blend of Cy Spurrier style mixed with classic Hellblazer
Hellblazer, because like Nat plays the role of the outsider to much of the stories, because she's kind of like, she's not a quote unquote detective. She's not the brains of the operation. She's the muscle. So she plays the outsider.
Well, she's got brains now.
Yeah. Yeah. Noah plays kind of like the driver. He listens to John. He's the one that essentially is kind of like us, where we're learning about the world that we're living in. And Constantine is the detective. He's the one that's figuring everything out and piecing everything together. In a lot of ways, he's dissecting the story that's given to him. And the thing I really do like how Spurrier and his team portrayed Constantine here is like Constantine isn't seen as a know-it-all. He's seen as like what he was in classic Hellblazer. He's the detective. He's the investigator. He's the one that's piecing it together and going, okay, so this is what it means. This is what this means. And usually he's the one that comes up with the ending phrase. You know, that's why I loved my favorite story of this quote unquote anthology is Suckers, because that ending, that just feels perfectly like Constantine.
Yeah.
Where Constantine's like telling people, yeah, don't be a sucker, basically.
Yeah. So David, just to make a quick comment on one of the points we made when we were breaking down, I believe, was it issue 3? Where was the T.S. Eliot episode that we discussed?
Issue 3.
Is issue 3.
Yeah.
One of our listeners on YouTube mentioned that, very politely, by the way. Wow. I mean, this day and age where someone comes in to correct you and they're fucking respectful and they're not a troll.
Wait, they're not a troll?
I'm like, what world is this?
I'm not being called an idiot? Fantastic.
Yeah. So the person wrote, so the listener wrote, while I understand why you guys are hesitant about Nat suddenly understanding the world, it was established in the previous run that Nat was in fact going to college before John brought her to America and messed up her life. And then they go on to say, if memory serves, it was shown in the first arc with the fake angels, where even John was surprised and kind of doubted her. And Nat clapped back with people being more than one thing. I remember that after I read this comment.
Yes.
So listen, I've always said that to the listeners. If we say something that is incorrect, there is so much information going on, especially when it comes to Constantine. And we're dealing with 30 plus years of history and stories.
A little tidbit of information might slip through the cracks.
Yeah, we need help sometimes. I'm very much open to that. I mean, especially if you're nice. I mean, what the fuck? Thank you for being nice.
And also just remember, it's just like what we said about this issue. There's many interpretations of the story. It just depends on how you interpret it.
Now, there's another comment that says, I like your review. Also, we're now on issue 8 because we're obviously behind.
Yes.
I'd like to see a review on each issue. Also, what do you think of Cy Spurrier's woke themes? Well, and this was a comment that was made on issue 1. So wait till you get to issue 3. I don't call it woke necessarily, but I'll leave that to you guys, because woke means a lot of different things to a lot of people. I don't believe breaking down history and having commentary that you want to share on politics, on life. Society can't function when we live in our own subjectivities.
Yes.
And when people share truths and the way they see the world, it expands our knowledge. I'm not against that. And I think that if there's a gay person in a story, or a story's about a Mexican or a black person, that doesn't make it woke. These people exist in reality. So having them be a part of your stories, or even telling their stories, is not woke. Woke is an ideology.
Yeah.
And that's what, and it's an ideology that is felt, and it permeates, and oftentimes degrades quality. So that's my interpretation of woke ideology in a nutshell. I know a lot of people, even Bob Iger got on the press carpet the other day, and they asked him about wokeness, and he's all, I don't think anybody knows what that means. I don't even know what that means. And I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of people now that just use it as a catch-all term for something that they don't like, that they perceive as overly progressive.
Yeah.
And that's not really the proper definition of what I would call woke.
I think the best way to put it is, like, I'm with you, and the more that you talked about it, is like, the way I see it is like,
woke is Supergirl.
Yeah.
Woke is Legends of Tomorrow. The ideology permeates its story.
The idea of wokeness is an opinion. Truth is not woke. Like, taking actual truths and facts, that is not woke. Yeah. Opinions are woke because they're not based on truth.
Yeah, and also, I hate using the word woke just because it's overly used, but also woke sucks the air out of the room. It doesn't allow for any discussion. And I do not feel that anything Spurrier has done has gone in that direction quite yet. You could make an argument that possibly there are moments in issue 3. I don't get turned off by people's opinions. I just don't like when it affects quality. That's what bothers me. All right, let's end this show before we start doing another one. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.